Hi, everyone. I am Chris Shields, the general manager of a company called Livingly Made Ingredients. So we're part of a group of companies now, all under the heading of the Meatless Farm. So the Meatless Farm is a plant-based company that produces ground mince, burgers, meatballs, etc., but the plant-based versions of. Livingly Made Ingredients is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Meatless Farm that produces textured proteins that we produce for the Meatless Farm, as well as selling externally too. So we have sustainability at the core of everything that we do. So the business was set up by the founder, Morten Toft Beck, as a way to give an alternative to the meat options without having to relearn how to cook. So the reason he was doing that was he wanted to do something, his small part for the environment, and doing that through food was the way he saw being able to do that. So we made a sustainable commitment, and we're just working through, we've just publishing this in the next few months here, our commitment timeline. So our first step is, what can we do immediately? What does the midterm look like? And then taking that slightly longer view to 2025, and we will be defining out to a 2030 as well. So our initial look at this is tackling really in 4 key areas for us. That's where we see the biggest impact of where we are as a business today. So greenhouse gas emissions, how we can get to net zero in our factory, and then how we take that down over until 2025. The use of water is one of the next key environmental issues for us to tackle. So how we reduce that from 30 to 50 to even 80% just by making changes. And then one of the key parts for us, farm contracts and reducing the use of land as well. So we kind of hit in 4 key pillars of sustainable commitment. That comes with many challenges, and the way we've taken this, or our approach, is to tackle and invest into what was Livingly Made Ingredients as the first step. So we're focused on extrusion technology to produce the proteins. This helps us from a supply chain security point of view to getting the highest quality product, as well as being able to then drive how we minimize the environmental impact through that process. So we started with this step so that we could drive the biggest change, with our vision really being to be net zero carbon emissions, as well as meet on nutrition, price, and taste too. So then, as you can see at this step here, we're extrusion first, and then the next key thing for that is the proteins that come into our factories through a process called fractionation, which has some impacts as well, which I'll quickly go through in a second. And then the next step for us is farm contracts. Farms are the most important part of the whole supply chain. Getting things right there means lowest amount of inputs throughout the whole process. But we've gone one step back further from that and looking into seed breeding. So this is where we've really focused, is at the beginning and the end of the process, and then we're filling in the gaps in between. So by putting a protein in the ground, or a seed in the ground that has a higher protein, we can do less processing throughout the process, as well as need less inputs potentially on the farm. So the biggest challenge for us next is the fractionation. This is just a really quick overview. I won't talk through each step, but just from a simple overview look. So fractionation, certainly for protein fractionation, is essentially splitting into fractions. So this is taking a whole pea or seed and splitting that into its component parts. You have a wet fractionation process and a dry. So in a wet, there's, as you can see, more steps. It's a more complicated process. It's much more costly to do. Can require chemicals to adjust pHs, but gets you a high protein. You can split that further to a protein fraction, a starch fraction, and a fiber fraction. And then that allows for further use in specific industries. On the dry side, less processing. It is essentially just grinding into powders and separating those out, but you do get a lower protein content. So we really need those higher protein percentages. And we found a way to take that from 50% up to 65% by going back a step further to the farm and to the seed. So that allows us to minimize the steps in the supply chain there and the energy used to do that. This would be anything up to a 90% reduction in water and energy use too. And that impacts on the farm. So the farm then has to grow less product because we need to split less protein, which has a benefit all the way through. So less land use, higher protein, less seeds, and less processing. So just to summarize how we see this, certainly our challenge in sustainability and how we can make the biggest impact, starting with the right point in the supply chain. So that was extrusion for us. And then what do those steps look like back through that? So for us, we taken this approach of extrusion first, then the seed, and then we can fill in the gaps in between. And then the last step for us and the most challenging is certainly the farming side. So farmers want longer term contracts to make these kinds of changes. We couldn't ask a farmer to rewild 5% of his land when we're only looking to contract for a year. So we have to take a long-term approach view, from seed breeding to farming to everything. So we're having to look very far off in the distance, which for a startup company is a challenge. And that's why we have to make those strategic investments into the right points. Rewilding for us, one of the things we want to do is we want to be a minimal impact and regenerative company. So one of the longer term views is to be a regenerative company. So we give more back than we take. And to do that, one of the steps we were looked at is, could we do rewilding programs? So for here in Canada, certainly you'd be looking at everything in 160 acre parcels of land. So if we could allocate 5% of that, what we'd be looking to do is contract that in so that the farmer would be paid for the productivity of that land that would be used, that could be let go to rewild. So we'd look at in the area and the ecosystem what should be done. So it might not necessarily be planting trees, it might be letting prairie grasses regrow, and letting the natural landscape take over, and then extending that out over the years. So we may start with 5% or 2% for the first target, 5% for the second, and then monitor the changes over the years. So it'd be a long-term relationship to give back. And that is everything from me on our challenge on sustainability. Certainly for our small piece of the world and the challenges that come with it, it's quite a challenge, but it's an exciting one for us to get stuck into. And I certainly think this is reflectable probably in many industries. It's just picking those pinpoint pivotal action points where you can tip the scales into the favor for improved sustainability practices. Thank you.